Hello everyone, good evening and welcome to another edition of AIQRATE webinar specials, the CXO series. Topic in today's edition is Reimagine the future of talent and workforce strategic approaches. And to discuss on this, we have with us Vijay Sivaram from Quess Corp, Samir Dhanrajani, CEO and co-founder at AIQRATE Advisory and Consulting, will be the moderator for this session. Before we begin the session, request all to be on mute throughout the webinar for better listening experience. Use the chat window for sharing your questions for Q&A. We are also recording this webinar, and the recorded webinar will be made available on our website www.aiqrate.ai and also on our YouTube channel. Now introducing today's guest, Vijay is part of the founding team for Quess Corp since its inception in 2007 as CEO for the IT staffing division, search and recruitment division, and Asia Pacific operations at Quess Corp. He is responsible for setting the strategic vision and direction for his focus areas while supporting and nurturing the leadership under his mandate to execute with confidence towards success. Vijay has been instrumental in grounding, innovating, and growing Quess Corp's vast portfolio of offerings. He has been exposed to all the platforms at Quess, from workforce management and operating asset management to tech services in his many roles with this organization. Vijay, thanks for making time and joining us in our CX webinar series.
Thank you. Thank you, NK.
Thank you. We'll now hand over the session to Samir. Samir, session is yours now. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, NK, for the introductions. And Vijay, it's a pleasure to have you at CXO Series Specials. Having known you from last almost 10 years now, I can vouch to the participants that the session would be, I would say, quite insightful. And given the time what we are talking about, where I think there are perceptible changes in terms of how each one of us is looking at, one, the future of work and the future of talent, a great sense of, I would say, nuggets await this entire 60 minutes or so. Let me start the ball rolling, Vijay, and let me kind of ask you in something which is very topical today. I think this is a factorial of two facets. One, there is the future of workforce talent, which is now getting mainstream. Rather, it's already mainstream. Coupled with that, there has been a surfeit of exponential technology, specifically AI, blockchain, IoT, which has come in. Now, in your own vantage view, what is that you see in terms of talent model shifts when we are talking about these two facets? And then if we couple, there is also a certain influx of what we call gig workers, startups, and deep tech firms. Now, if you see this entire potpourri, and I'm sorry I'm making it a layered one, but more important is for our audience to kind of understand from your own viewpoint, how's this whole model shifts in the talent workspace is looking like?
Oh, that's a great start to a question. Thank you so much for inviting me, NK and Samir. I think it's an absolute pleasure to be here. Looking forward, and I've always seen the progression that AIQRATE has been doing in the space. So thanks a lot for the invite. To start off with, I think I'd like to term what we're going through pre-COVID, post-COVID in the last 1 year or so is the fluidity of employment today. Today, employment is not structured the way it was one believed to have been. If you remember a couple of generations back, a job would have been fantastic when you get a government job. That quickly translated into something being, can I have a private job and can I have a corporate job, etc. As countries develop themselves, as if you look at towards Europe and towards US, you'll notice that the rise of contractual workforces came into being, and that's percolating into most of the emerging countries today. And that's one of the largest businesses that are run today. If you see the growth that I've seen in the contractual hiring, it's significant. And now we move towards the gig workforce. So I think today, the fluidity of employment is becoming a choice for organizations to work on. And therefore, the concept of human as a resource becomes variabilized in its own way. many a time an organization will look at resource as a fixed term cost or a fixed cost. Today, that is being discussed on a variabilized form. And which is why you get to also hear as many times when you have a company ramping up, you also have many companies ramping down, is because this fluidity of employment allows them to be variable in its own way. So today, most organizations are tampering about, okay, what is the job required to be? And therefore, how long will this job need to be there? And that defines whether the person needs to be hired as a full-time employee and whether this hire needs to be a contractual or a gig workforce. Now, if I were to step that back from an employee standpoint, the employee now starts to see also the fact that he also has these options and he or she also starts leveraging. Many of them would say, I would like a full-time job, but I'm constrained by what that organization teaches me and takes me through. While if I'm a contractor today, I get the choice of moving faster in life, either on compensation or in terms of role. While the gig worker, on the other hand, gets to choose the life he wants to lead. And therefore, today, on both sides, there seems to be an extremely tight pull and push to figure out what's the best to the individual and to the organization objective. So, to answer your question, in short, the talent model shift today is a definition of how core the job needs to be done and for how long. And that defines. So, if you're doing an SAP implementation for an organization, there's no need to hire a full-time resource. It doesn't make sense. If you're going to be hiring an agenda for someone who's going to lead sales, you would want a full-time person because he has to be committed to the organization on a longer perspective. And therefore, these decisions today allow a talent model shift to happen in an organization per se. And I think this is going one step further even more to also start allowing employees to start working on gig arrangements in specialized areas. So today, I've had customers who have onboarded people who are sitting in London for a job that's being done in India because there's no borders anymore in the gig workforce. So we have hired a cybersecurity expert sitting in London doing the job for a project in India whose customers in somewhere in Europe. So I think the whole flexibility that this employment shift is giving is changing the way how companies look at it.
Now, I think you said it well, and I picked up something which is very pertinent, which is this fluidity of work or the employment. Now, a vast piece of our own workforce in India is into technology, IT. And if I take your opinion, and which is what I want to take, I mean, you have an extensive experience of working with technology, BMODs, large IT players. Now, there are two, I would say, changes which have happened over there, which, in my opinion, would love to pick up your thoughts. One is the legacy aspects about their applications, their readiness about what they should be doing with the clients has all been kind of wiped out. I mean, a lot of that changes happen in terms of their, I would say, revenue mix. On the other side, under this whole umbrella of digital, they've got a surfeit of new technologists, new kind of, let's say, business guys who are focused on bringing new age exponential technology and use it at that particular, I would say, vantage position where you're able to see this entire shift, how IT companies are trying to kind of adapt to stay relevant. What is your opinion, or what is your, I would say, viewpoint on this entire talent mix when it comes to the IT workforce?
Very interesting. Again, in fact, it's a battling ground today in most of, if you see the largest services organization, because historically they have been built on hiring more resources and more people to support the billable nature of their employees. And that making them very heavy on the talent side of things. When what they're actually selling is how they digitize and automate the workforce for the customer, they've actually built a huge legacy of workforce. So a large part of what I see in today's organization is this huge need to create a reskilling and an upskilling platform for this legacy workforce. Because I'll give you a very simple example from a call center kind of an environment. Imagine a fresher joining a customer care center as his first job. He works there for 1 year. He takes calls throughout the day. His salary, let's say, is 25,000 rupees a month. Year two, he gets his appraisal. He becomes 30,000. He's still taking calls. Now, a team of 30 people, not everyone becomes a team leader. So year three comes into play. And now he's at a salary of 35 to 40,000 rupees, and he's still taking calls, and he's not yet become a TL, because out of 30, only one become a TL. And then that can continue to a point when the organization starts realizing that he's too costly to do the same job that he was hired 3 years ago. And in a similar way, the legacy systems today in most of the legacy workforce, or the large amounts of people that have been deployed to many of the services firms, are going through this. But the good side is also that you can evolve them, you can push them to do more. And therefore, this is huge push that's happening today on reskilling and upskilling programs. So today, being on the bench is considered almost taboo today. And therefore, there's a huge pushback by employers to say you need to be upskilled or out of the game. And I think that's happening in a big way. We're seeing a lot of customers talk to us, as well as a lot of action happening on just pushing more skills as such. The legacy workforce is also seeing opportunity coming across, because India is still used to be an offshore destination. So they start moving laterally rather than vertically. Most people would build their career by moving vertically, but today you start seeing a large amount of workforce moving laterally. Now, what happens there? You start seeing a redundant set of workforce not growing up, but getting a little stagnated and becoming more cost heavy as well. So I think that gap of knowing versus learning, and I'll just spend a minute on that, Samir, because there's something which I truly believe that's happening today, is that you might be a gold medalist in an engineering college, you might be a gold medalist from your IT training institute, etc. It doesn't matter anymore. Knowing doesn't matter anymore, because there's Google. There's many areas where you can find out there. It's the learning that's creating the issue today. The adaptability of picking up a skill and that's not pertinent only to IT alone. If you're a Java and you want to pick up Python, or you want to pick up AngularJS, that's a learning curve that you progress. If you're a salesperson, knowing what is marketing analytics, that becomes a learning process. If you're an HR person, knowing how the financial models are being worked in the organization so that you can build your comp and bend better, those are becoming. So therefore, skill today is taking more of an importance than just knowing the basics and fundamentals as such. No doubt, I think at the end of the day, fundamentals are core, but your skill decides what career is. And therefore, most of these organizations are working towards building skill-based employees, and therefore making them billable in nature, and or making sure they're relevant to the projects that they're getting in. Also, of course, there's a huge amount of companies that are looking at what I call as abandon the valley concept, where people are trying to shift from mainstay cities to broken down tier 2, tier 3 cities, to just expand on the talent at a lower cost. So if in US outsourced to India, to tier 1 cities, tier 1 companies are now outsourcing it from tier 1 to tier 2 cities. So there's an abandon the valley program also happening, which kind of replaces the legacy workforce with a new legacy workforce in a smaller city at a lower cost. So companies are doing different things to ensure they stay relevant. But as we progress towards the digital skill, which is the talk of the hour and the need of the day, etc., the talent is getting a lot more smaller, and the legacy teams are becoming a heavyweight, and that's pulling down some companies, and which is why you see so much of news. And these teams are laid off, these teams are being reskilled, these teams are being upskilled, because that's a lot of weight that companies are carrying.
So I think that's a very fantastic response what you had put in, and in fact I like this particular analogy, abandon the valley. Now, because anyway with the COVID happening, a lot of us are even thinking of abandoning the metros given the kind of a surge we are seeing. But I think if I nudge you over there, Vijay, and you touched the right point about the skilling, learning, adaptability piece. Now, there is a battle of the bulge, I call it, within the IT workforce, technology workforce. Middle layer seemingly is getting redundant. Now, what IT companies are trying to do is to kind of really bring in freshers, a lot of those rookies from the colleges, trying to adjust the pyramid. Do you think this is a sustainable option, or it's more like a kind of an interim makeshift arrangement?
I think it's here for the short term. In the long term, definitely it's going to be a problem. But in the short term, I think, Samir, it would still continue, because there is still a large need, and there is still a large amount of. So if you were to just take the digitization of companies today, I would, from what I know, it's just still 20-22% of companies globally are moving that digital push really hard. A large percentage of companies still are rallying around legacy concepts or legacy structures and are unable to come to that. And that throws huge potential for companies to expand into that space. And therefore, that human manpower is still required in the short term. But in the longer run, I think what will happen is a lot of the vanilla skills will get replaced by automation, which is a known fact. Everyone talks about it, etc., and all this stuff. But where people will lose out, especially that middle layer, is what I think. I think that's a line that nobody seems to flatten out, because people keep hiring laterals a lot on the assumption that they also upgrade themselves. But I think that middle layer is getting too complacent and getting into a comfort zone because they do have customer relationships, which is key to the customer, which is key to the company, and they also manage teams, which is key, and therefore they become somewhere in between to know whether they're useful or not. But that's not going to last too long. At some point of time, it's going to be a function of creating leaders that define either by domain or by function, and they will drive units, and it will not be too many people at the middle. Is my take.
Got it. No, I think that's a good explanation you gave. But within the context, and I'm moving more largish outside of course, technology, there is this whole aspect within the whole ecosystem of future of talent and workforce, which has come in as the gig workers. I mean, sometime in the news, sometime back in the news, it was about 35% of the IT workforce will be gig workers, but predominantly, you've seen that with very close lens in terms of how gig workers over the years have evolved in India. Tell us something what's happening with this entire aspect of gig workers, because then there are added layers about the best practices about them in terms of employment, the whole social security aspect, the whole aspect how they need to be managed in terms of permanent versus, let's say, this contractual workforce. So tell us the flavor around what's happening on the gig worker side, and also what's the future lying for them? Is it a kind of a, let's say, fad, or it's going to stay and companies will have to bake in gig workers as part of their talent mix?
No, I think it's definitely here to stay. I don't see any ideology that would say otherwise. So let me explain to you how so Quess today is India's largest private employer. We have around 380,000 people that we do. And a large percentage of that workforce is what we categorize as a gray collar workforce. So they are skilled in some way. So many of the shops that today you and I, Samir, walk into, the guy who sells you the product or the promoter that sells you the product is most likely a Quess employee. The person who packages your product in some of the leading e-commerce companies are somewhere. Now, what I'm trying to say is that historically, these were jobs that were 9 to 6 based, or they had particular 9-hour shifts. What we are seeing over the last 2 years is that this 9 to 6 flavor is moved towards when the consumer wants to be there. So if your traffic in a store is going to be 4 hours in the morning and 4 hours late evening, you are now hiring people who can capture that 4 hours in the morning and 4 hours in the evening, and not just a 9 to 6. So you see that there'll be a shift of people that will now work in different tandem. And this is common in the hotel industry. While they were still full-time employees, you would have different shifts. They'll have a break in between and come back. Now you will see that across multiple industries where you will actually see people coming in for a couple of hours, doing the job, going somewhere else, doing something else. And so it's definitely here to stay. But where is the problem with the gig force, and what is the issue why people are still apprehensive? Is because functionally there is a legal lag. So as the workforce it's like an IT skill, it's so dynamic, it keeps improving itself that you're not keeping up to date, or your workforce is not keeping up to date. Similarly, as the employment has become more fluid, the legal structure or the labor frameworks are not up to date, especially in emerging countries. If you see, they don't know what to do with a gig worker. Are they a full-time employee? Who takes care of them? Who's accountable for them? Is it them by themselves, or is it the employer, or is it the end customer, etc.? So in fact, today in the paper as well, in the Economic Times, it was actually captured as to how we can give benefits to the gig worker. And this should kind of formalize the structure for the gig workers. I just hope it doesn't reduce their freedom as such. But it also poses a lot of threats. So what happens in a good framework if you have too much of gig? Let's assume that it goes all over the place. then you'll start having a lot of security issues. And I think most of the organizations take one step back today before employing a gig worker just to make sure that they have the right security. Look at it from this perspective. If, let's say, you are an IT engineer, you've got some great talent, you're building some amazing platforms. You come back home after work, you start working with another company in the night, with someone in the US or someone in the UK, and you start parallelly running similar platforms from the knowledge base that you earned in your full-time employment. You're now kind of running a security risk here. One, there's a dual employment happening. Two, one doesn't know about the other except for that resource himself, and there's IP that's being transitioned out. So I think there are some genuine threats that also happens if you have too much. So going back to my first point, to your first question, organizations will evolve themselves to have the right mix of these sets of employees. And I think that's where measures like security, measures like dual employment, making sure that they are compliant towards the law of the time, get the job done where it is required. So in shorter terms, today, if you hire a full-time employee, you're worried about his outcome, you're worried about his growth, you're worried about his commitment to the organization. In a contractor, you're worried about his outcome, and you're worried about the tenure. How long is he going to be? The 6 months, 1 year, because that's why you hired him. But in a gig worker, you're just worried about outcome. That's the core interest of hiring a gig. You want him to build a website. You want him to check a particular retail store during peak times. And therefore, it goes towards a pure outcome. And if you know, I'm sure all of us know on the call that today the world is moving towards everything that's outcome based. Nobody wants a 5-pointer KRA anymore. How much are you going to bring to the company? What are the results? And what is the eventual EBIT or the eventual revenue? And I think gig helps that. But too much also will be a little tough.
No, I think you said it well because, and specifically the last facet, what you touched upon, that given organizations themselves have a plasticity in terms of demand and fungibility in terms of scenario, how do you kind of see that workforce kind of a thing being on a permanent or kind of on the roll side where you yourself don't know how the financial and the business metrics will shape up in the time to come? Because we've seen what's happened in the last 6 months. I mean, truly every business plan has gone for a fart. And really now it's like a very different scenario in terms of what I call this is not a strategy. This is maybe a new normal all for us kind of a thing. So,
but it's here to stay, Samir.
Yeah.
It is here to stay. Crowdsourcing platforms today for gig workers are maturing. They're still very nascent, but I think the crowdsourcing platforms for gig workers will mature as we progress. That will create structure in attracting the talent, which helps in managing the talent. So I think it'll eventually move there.
Wonderful, wonderful. So one of the thing, and this is completely shifting gears, if I wouldn't have asked this thing, Vijay, I'm sure the questions would have come in on this. Last 6 months specifically, this whole pandemic has really changed a lot of thinking. What are the hiring trends you've seen? I mean, particularly, and Quess being really in thick of the things. Give us some kind of a lay of the land, the hiring trends in the last 6 months. What sectors from the industry have actually gone up in terms of the uptick of demand? What's been on a soft side in terms of some of these sectors? And specifically within functions, what is that you're seeing in terms of surge of hiring, and what's something which is not taking off?
Okay, I think this is something which is possibly one of the most talked upon points by every single leader, newspaper, etc. So I hope that I will not repeat myself quite a bit, but I can tell you for sure that if I were to categorize by domain, within the technology world, you're seeing a huge amount of work happening in the digital side. So there is everything coming from Kubernetes to microservices to RPAs to building blockchain technologies, etc. So I think there's a lot of shift more. So when I used to pre-COVID, at any given point of time, we would have close to 6,000 open demands, of which close to around 60 to 70% would be mainstream Java, .NET, etc. Now we are seeing a shift towards more digital demands and also significant amount of work in ERPs like Salesforce and SAP and all that stuff. And so it's almost becoming 60 towards the newer skills and 40 towards the old skills as such. The old skills still have volume in them, etc. But the new skills generate more excitement and interest, and that's growing very fast. On the banking side or in the banking and financial services side, we are seeing a lot of cautious hiring. So there is hiring happening, but it's not in the likes which they used to do earlier. So there is a need to hire quality sales guys that still continues to be there. There's a lot of work that's happening in the fund manager portfolios and in terms of managing equities, because whatever happens, whatever has happened in the last 6 months or so, the equity markets have been extremely volatile, both good and bad. And that's keeping most of the markets and most of the financial services extremely still on it. But it's not reached pre-COVID levels at all. It's still very, very low compared to, but these are the areas that we are seeing some movement still. In telecom is going quite well, even though they are struggling. The need for 5G, the technology behind 5G, and the networks that are required for it, there's still some rampant hiring that's happening. And I think Geo is doing its own bit for it and keeping everyone on their toes as such. But again, nowhere near pre-COVID. The other market where which is seeing significant hiring is the healthcare side, which is natural because there's a lot of interest in finding out products, ancillary products, and supplementary products. I think so. The whole pharmaceutical, healthcare, life sciences um, industry itself is just rampantly hiring both on the R&D side as well as on the devices side. So there is a huge movement that's happening there as well. We're seeing a lot of captive centers coming to India now. So we're talking to a lot of companies that are looking at setting up offshore centers. So on-site, the hiring is reduced, but off-site technology and outsourcing still continues to be there. So I think overall, from a hospitality and lifestyle as well as travel, no doubt, I think it's going to take some time for them to come back. I think it's still a long run for them for life to be back to normal. But anything that's linked to technology, outsourcing, pharmaceutical, healthcare is seeing an upward trend. Now, one last piece which I think is very, very interesting is the entire e-commerce fintech world. And I think that is seeing some amazing movement, both from the blue collar delivery workforce to, if you look at ed tech, for example, on an average, each of the ed tech firms are looking to hire 50 to 100 sales guys each. So there's a huge need for upskilling and reskilling.
You're saying despite the slowdown, despite this whole pandemic, fintech and about edtech, right?
Yeah, so they're just going full on. I think one point is there they have money to burn, so they have been funded heavily to burn cash, and they need to show revenues. But I think there is also a buyer, so there are enough buyers to put in and that money as well. And I'm seeing that a lot of traction. And of course, e-commerce giants that are also pulling in a lot of strength, especially with the holiday season just around the corner. There's a lot of pushback that's happening there as well. So the reason why I kept e-commerce, fintech, and edtech all separate, uh, it might not be long term. It might be in this pandemic that's going through, and I think somewhere it will stabilize. But others, I still see healthcare, technology, outsourcing will still progress through the year.
How about the business functions horizontal? I mean, what kind of demand? Because what you gave a very good picture was this whole verticals, I mean, how industry segments. But what about the business functions and horizontals, Vijay?
Very interestingly, we've seen a lot of demand spike up in the area of finance. Now, I'm not too sure if that's a function of quality chartered accountants or not. I might be wrong, but there has been an increase in demands for quite a lot of finance professionals. We are also seeing a lot of hiring that's happening in areas like marketing, marketing analytics, digital marketing, and social and managing social marketing as well in the marketing side. HR, however, has still been a little low. I don't think so. In fact, that's primarily because companies don't hire too much nowadays, and therefore the need to hire HR professionals has become a little low. But within the HR fraternity, if I were to pick up one, talent management is becoming a very key aspect. Hiring, managing the core talent, how do we make them better, do better, create more productivity, ensure they stay the course. I think that's a lot of talk that's happening right now. L&D is seeing a revival of sorts because this is possibly the best time for an L&D person because everyone's at home and you need to keep them engaged, so you train them. And I think L&D is seeing some activity, but not hiring activity, but engagement activity. In the sales function, I think there will never be a dearth of what you call hiring as such. They'll all good sales guys will always get picked up. I think the problem is foot soldiers might not be as many as it were, and I think that's come down. But if you look at edtech and fintech, I'm seeing more of demand. And e-commerce, we are seeing a lot of foot soldiers being hired too, but the quality slightly is different. I think they still hire a tad higher than the normal foot soldiers that one see. Apart from that, I think core technology or the core IT teams of companies, I think that's seeing high. You're seeing a lot of hiring happening in information security people, SAP and ERP implementation people. There's a lot of hiring that's happening in setting up the infrastructure. Again, that's because of the need of the hour. This got hit right on many people's faces. They didn't know what to do. Their infrastructure, most BCP plans was built on a range of 30-40% working from home. They were not ready for the 100% working from home. So a lot of IT infrastructure and security had to be overhauled. The IT function continues, but you'll never hire large volumes there. But there is a need.
Great, great. No, I think that's a awesome paint of the brush in terms of how exactly the whole market landscape has evolved. And good to know what you mentioned about fintech, edtech, and specifically finance professionals, just to keep that urge of enterprises going, not going, rather insolvent is something what's keeping the kind of
Yeah, I guess so.
of talent running. Great, great. So let me shift gears, and Vijay, this is where I think. It's more about kind of taking your vast experience and giving some of these, I would say, succinct insights. Now, talent sourcing is an art and a science, if I may call it, and it's evolved over the years. Uh, as an organization which gets millions of profiles every year, or rather every month, if I call it, and I'm sure in your entire career, you must have gone through, I mean, few hundred thousands of CVs in person, profiles and all. How is this entire talent sourcing working out in terms of this filtering of the right profile and really looking at what's pertinent for the organization, the fitment as we call it? Because if you take a cue from the social channels, everyone is a thought leader on LinkedIn, a kind of a movie star on Facebook,
True.
and a kind of a, let's say, a great chef on Instagram. And it's not making sense over there. So in this whole space, I want to take your opinion about one, how's this art of and science of talent sourcing which has evolved? And second, how do you go about selecting or rather differentiating from the kind of a profile in terms of who's a mediocre, who's a proficient, and who's in between in terms of this professional? So I've just asked a kind of a two-pronged question. Happy to take your
Sure.
inputs.
So I started my career as a recruiter. So it's a deep love for me. I think I second you on the fact that I think recruiting is an it's an art. It's you need passion to do recruiting, and I always find it very interesting. If you go ask most of the CEOs, and I work with a lot of them, they spend 30-40% of their core time interviewing people. And yet, even today, there's no single MBA school or a B school that teaches recruiting as a process. They teach you HR, but they don't teach you recruiting. But CEOs spend a lot of time on recruiting, and therefore, I think I'd like to break your two questions into a few parts. So there is one part of recruiting will, throughout, at least to my knowledge, will continue to have significant human intervention. So the very fact to interview a candidate and to validate and screen them will continue to happen in some form. And let me give you some examples. If you're hiring a CEO or if you're hiring a vice president or a very senior leadership profile, I can quite guarantee you that how much ever you have technology platforms, there's always the need to meet or at least talk to the person to understand his cultural fitment, because candidates come in all shapes and sizes. They come with all frames of mind, and I don't think so there is an AI tool today, at least to my knowledge, that has figured out to figure how to compare two CEOs of equal stature and who's better. But that being said, the entire talent sourcing process, or if I were call the recruiting funnel, has a lot of repetitive work that happens. A simple example would be scheduling of interviews and making sure candidates attend interviews. That will be extremely automated. It is unlikely that you will have schedulers. Many companies have that today. where they have people who actually schedule interviews and that's their core job. I think that will get automated. The entire operational process of collecting documents and onboarding an employee. Today, out of the 385,000 people that we hire every month anywhere between 8 to 10,000 people or 5 to 6,000 people, depending on the cycle. And to onboard them physically is not possible anymore. You'll have to onboard them too. So we digitize the entire process at the back end till it gets verified at the background verification level. And I think that will be a significant shift. So in short, I think all the repetitive tasks of a talent sourcing process will get automated. What will not get automated is the physical interview or the physical, while vanilla skills, entry level sales hiring, junior level hiring, you can still automate with various tools. Today, we have tools that do call outs, we have assessment tools, we have productivity measuring tools, psychometric assessments. So all that will still happen. So I think the lower layers will somewhere get a little more automated in hiring. There will be very less human intervention. But as you go up on the levels, I think there still will be a lot of human. To the second part of how to choose, and I'll speak this from my own personal experience as me as an interviewer for a customer, and what I do differently. And I'm generally not very shy to say this, but it's my perspective, of course. I always start off a conversation with a candidate by telling him who I am and what I do and what the job that I'm talking to him about. Now, most interviews generally would start by saying, can you tell me about yourself or can you explain your profile to me? I never go that route. And as I finish my introduction about the job role and myself, the next question that I ask a candidate is, do you like this role? Now, it generally puts candidates in a spot because first 5-10 minutes in many of the leadership hiring cases, the decision is already made. You've already decided either by gut or by his first set of responses whether you want to hire him or not. And the next 30 minutes or 40 minutes of the conversation is to just revalidate that in some form or just reassess your bias towards it. But by asking a question like this, so do you like this job or do you like this role? It suddenly puts the candidate in a spot to actually tell you whether he's just looking or he's committed or does he understand the job, etc. Now, I'll jump to the end of the conversation. When you jump to the end of the conversation, something that I use and it's always helped me in my executive search assignments is I always tell them, take a day, do your research on me, on the company that you're going to join, on the leadership over there, the kind of tenure people have there, and come back to me if you're interested. I know I lose a day in this process, but the fact remains is those people who usually jump up and immediately say, no, I've really liked this job. I think it's great. I just don't think they've given enough thought. And by giving that extra one day, you actually kind of let them think. And that kind of comes back to show commitment and stuff like that. So I think going back, there is the part which human intervention will always add value. But there are many parts of the process within the talent sourcing engine which will get automated in some form. Today, a recruiter today can depend. 3 years ago, if you had asked me what are my channels of sourcing, I would tell you that there's Naukri, there's Monster, there are job portals, and there's LinkedIn, and there are internal database. That would be my sales pitch, or that would be how I would explain where my. Today, I operate on 12 to 15 different channels where I get talent pools from. I have the same portals, I have the same internal databases. Today, I do hiring hackathons to hire. Today, I do assessment-based hiring where I send them a link, they do a test, a coding test, or they do a psychometric test, and then they kind of pre-assess. They send for interviews. Today, I do call outs to 300 candidates in a span of 20 minutes, like a telemarketing call to reach out to a wider audience. So today, the channels of sourcing are much more with social interfere, moderation, and there's so many areas where you can get good talent. And community-based hiring is happening. So I think that way life has changed. I think people are more accessible than they were earlier, than just one Naukri, one Monster. But that still doesn't solve the process of that core validation. But entry level skills somewhere will still get automated somewhere. But the others, I think we still have some more time before the leadership hiring guys get automated per se.
Wonderful, wonderful. I think that's pretty, I would say, interesting in terms of what you said. Extending the same thing, how much of, and what is something, what you see is what I'm asking, how much of this artificial intelligence in terms of really sifting the profiles, getting the right set of database created is being used by the organization. And also coupled with, as you said, today that analysis of the profiles is not just based on assessment. There is more of this behavioral science and ethnographic profiling, getting into the skin of a person or other professional and seeing what he or she is trying to do on the social channel is also a personality trait and attribute which gets created outside of what he or she exudes in the profile or rather demonstrates. How much of this is happening in the marketplace today, Vijay?
So I'll give you 3 live examples of
Ah,
things that we do today, and you'll find some of them very interesting if you've not heard of them before. So coming back to your AI, today we have tools, what we call as stack ranking tools. So based on the profile that comes in, so let's say you've got 100 profiles, there are artificial intelligence systems that go through these profiles and stack ranks them based on the quality of the profile and the content that it has. And it has algorithms built in to find out what kind of projects these people have done, how much of sales experience do they have, and it stack ranks you from 1 to 100. So time in not calling all 100, but just call the top 20. So there's stack ranking from an AI standpoint that's still happening. A very simple or a very effective AI also happens. For example, I'm hiring for a certain sales high profile or a leadership profile. And in the history, in the past, I've hired for similar positions, and I've known that a certain set of colleges, let's say a certain set of IMs, have been successful with that customer for whatever reason, but purely based on history that these candidates got selected, and therefore it throws up those similar set of candidates in the assumption that there can be better fits. So while it's still based on the intelligence of the history, may not be always relevant, but it helps because as a past history that these set of candidates have got selected before, a similar set of candidates, and therefore helps conversion better. Now, there's a third set, which is extremely interesting that I came across very recently, and we had tried a POC, etc. It's a face monitoring system where, as you give an interview, it checks the different angles of the face to tell whether you're lying or not. And it captures your commitment to the organization with huge sets of data that has been programmed. And it's not new science. It exists today on reading faces, and it exists. So it's not new. I'm very intrigued by it. I'm still not sure. Sometimes I think Indian candidates are smarter than the system, but I think it's interesting that there's a start. And today it can actually blacklist a candidate by the way the candidate moves his facial expressions. And so there is very interesting tools that are being involved today. A lot of application tracking systems use these tools today. But personally, with my experience, and this is my perspective only, I think we're still nascent. We're still not there yet. In the next 3 years, I think it's going to be a different world in terms of how this really helps candidates.
Wonderful. Tricking the algorithm is what you were referring to when it came to judging the whole facial expression. And I think we're all living and kind of even seeing those algorithms in the play for us. But great points, what you said. Sticking on to a thing which I still believe is a perceptible change in the future of talent and workforce is something I have a question for you, which is not long so ago, everyone was saying, okay, become a specialist, deep specialist, get under the hood to know what's inside a vertical or a horizontal, and just ensure that you understand to the T what it entails in terms of being a kind of a really proficient in a journalist. Sorry, a specialist. Suddenly, we see a kind of a shift. Now there are folks who are in demand called deep specialist, or rather deep journalist. My bad. These are all semantics, but carries a lot of, I would say, sense. Deep journalist. And this correlates to the point what you said in the earlier part of your narration, Vijay, was about this fungibility of employment, the whole kind of, let's say, fluidity which has emerged. Do you see deep journalists coming into the workplace today because of the whole uncertain nature of the organization and this whole aspect where today the workforce is more measured, as you rightly said, in terms of outcomes?
Absolutely. I've been an advocate of this for the past 8-9 months, that the era of specializations is going out of the window. It's the art of being knowledgeable across spaces. Today, a marketing person needs to know his analytics. Today, a salesperson needs to know finance, how a balance sheet is made. Today, a finance person needs to know how a company sells and what are the different components of a pricing mix. And I think today the whole idea of having an alternative skill or skills is becoming so relevant today. And this is kind of, if you look back, if you look at the last few years, it's also because of this huge entrepreneurial spirit that's running around the world. There is this need to have a culture that will think about everything and not think about one. Well, if you say, will the specialists cease to exist? No. You will still have a cybersecurity specialist. You will still have someone who understands analytics and data sciences and algorithms. But I think overall, the core, as you move towards leadership, the need to know different facets of the business is becoming extremely important. And this is very common. If you cut across most of your clients, you will see people being cross trained, cross skilled. So I think the word that I've started using nowadays is being conscious about the complexities.
Be
We always
conscious
knew
about the complexity. Okay, nice.
conscious about complexities, because we all know the world is complicated, the business is complicated, but being conscious about the complexities to run a business, I think that's becoming a spearhead moment for most employees to know, okay, so if I talk to the finance guy and understand this will help me price my product better rather than just sending an email and please put the pricing and send it back to me. I don't think so. That doesn't work. A good CFO is a great business CFO. A great CEO understands finance, understands trial balance, understands how to reduce debt, how to raise capital. I think today those are all becoming interconnected as such. And this ecosystem that we create within the leadership groups today is where it helps. And that also helps in community, in collective intelligence, because as you start learning about each other, you start picking up points faster and making decisions faster. In every senior leader decision making, there's always a component of risk. And as you learn more and as you pick up more skills along the way, I think that element of risk becomes a little more better. And therefore, businesses gain more predictability. Why are we all worried during a COVID environment? Why are we worried about it? Because suddenly everything around us became unpredictable. And I think yet most organizations have stood tall and said, we will go through this, we will clear this, because they suddenly know what are the different things they need to pull and push to make sure. But my take is a couple of years ago, 5-10 years ago, a scenario like this would have seen a lot of leaders crumble because they were not multi-skilled or multifunctional of that aspect. And I'm seeing a lot of senior leaders going up for education themselves. They pick up degrees in Stanford, they pick up degrees in INSEAD and many other degrees as such, just to keep them updated of what's happening around the world and not just relevant. Just I'm a great sales guy, hence I'll be my sales guy throughout my life. No, it doesn't. You have HR people being entrepreneurs. You have finance people running organizations. So I think it's amazing time to be I like the word deep generalist. I've believed in that in the last 8 months, 1 year, that you need to know more than what you specialize on. I don't know if an MBA specializing in HR holds good than just a good MBA.
Fantastic. First up, I think one of the thing which I think is not only a question for me, I'm sure there are participants who would like to understand about Quess. I mean, this has been an organization in the making and some really kick-ass work what you guys have done in the past. Help us explain this whole business model, what you have, and how you guys manage such kind of high velocity of, I would say, workforce. And you introduce a term called gray collared workers. Help us demystify that as well. But would love to know about Quess as an organization, Vijay.
Thanks. I think Quess started off in 2007 by a bunch of us. We decided to join together to set up a format that will help build employability in the country. So it was largely focused on hiring contractual workers and recruiting and all that stuff. But somewhere along the way, we realized there was this huge void in companies to help bring down costs and be more efficient. So if you take a financial statement, a P&L statement of a company, what Quess does is give a solution to most of the items that would fall under your indirect cost. Right. So what do we do there? So there is one, we provide people in some forms, in either contractual, full-time, leadership, etc. So we help identify resources that can help you. That forms your wage cost or your salary cost. If you look at the next big thing is technology. So we have a global technology services platform. We run one of India's largest domestic call centers today. Most of the calls that you get from leading banks and leading DTH providers, etc., you're most likely getting a call from a Quest run call center. And we also run our own IT software services company that helps build analytics and RPAs and stuff like that, digital work. And that forms the technology services, which is technology expenses that one would have. We also have monster.com, which is part of a job site, which anchors both on the technology as well as the workforce business. Very interestingly, we have a third line of business where we do a lot of work around facility management, operating assets, man guarding, security services, etc., which are extremely resource driven, but also pretty much recession free in a way. You might have a shutdown office, but you'll still want your security guards over there. You would center, etc. We manage telecom towers today in India. We manage if you buy a branded phone in most of the leading brands, when you have a warranty issue within the warranty period, when you go to the service center, that service center actually is owned and run by us. We have a logistics company that does. So in short, anything that forms a non-core to a company becomes core to me, and that's what we do in Quess largely, and that's how we are able to build this large workforce of 384,000 people across these 10 countries. So
384,000.
We are India's largest private employer today and fifth largest staffing company globally, I think. But personally, if you really ask me, while I've been very fortunate to be part of the founding team and having worked with some of the best leadership, I think we've had a fantastic culture going. Most of the people that joined us between 2007 and 2008 are still in the company running businesses today. And I think that's really helped us get geared up for moving and diversifying into all these businesses that I mentioned. Sounds complicated, it may, but functionally, just the art of helping customers reduce cost, improve productivity, and supporting there. So it's been an interesting journey. I think what has really helped us reach this cause has been the use of technology. So we were very, very, very ahead of time in technology. And we used a lot of digital footprint to make sure scale was not a concern. And I think that's really helped us in these times. We didn't have to burn too much of cost, and because technology was running the show, we are moving towards. We always keep saying this joke that if Quest was a country, there would be 50 countries with lesser population than us. And in a way, all these 380,000 people are citizens of Quest, And now the journey is to be how can we be more data efficient and leverage data to make more better decisions. So I think that's the journey we're going forward to.
Wonderful. Now, I think that will open up eyes of, or rather ears in virtual world of many of the participants about the sheer size and the volume and the velocity, how you guys handle this 384,000 and growing workforce. Phenomenal. One of the questions, Vijay, I have, and we have a few minutes left before we wind up, is about this whole automation AI getting a concern amongst a workforce, a substantial, I would say in the mindset of the workforce that displacement will happen. Do you see that kind of, let's say, as part of the discussion with clients or organizations, or what is that you see around this thing and in terms of your own?
It's bound to happen, but the world has an amazing sense of balance, Samir. I think as there might be jobs that will get displaced, but there will be an equal number of jobs that are going to be created, right? 5 years ago, if you and I were to talk on a conversation to see how many blockchain professionals or UiPath professionals would be there, we would be possibly just having a laugh. But today, that's a segment of its own. So that balance will continue to change. And I think people who lose out in this balance are either going to be people who haven't upskilled or reskilled themselves, or people who have been too long doing the same thing. And I keep asking my leadership and I keep asking customers of mine as to, are they doing the same job for more than 2-3 years? And if they are, I would be really worried, because that means somewhere they're going to be automated. And hence the diversity of workforce and the work profile is so co-connected that that has to keep moving up. If you're stuck doing the same thing, and I think somewhere you start becoming redundant. You just have to keep changing, upgrading, maybe even I've seen so many people have succeeded by even changing the complete function that they were part of. And I think there's enough courses and learning material today to help you get there. But it's a reality. There are jobs that are going to get impacted by automation and AI, no doubt. I think some of the work that uh, Samir, you have done in helping companies identify redundancies in processes, right? That will happen. But at the same time, for you to implement those redundancies, the new processes, you still need to hire a whole bunch of guys. So transformation teams was non-existent 8-9 years ago. Process excellence existed. Now it's become transformation. And so you will find a whole set of new genre of jobs that are coming in. But yeah, it's not going to be a lift and shift. There will be transitioning of workforces.
Wonderful. One more question, Vijay, and this is something maybe I want to take because we didn't touch this aspect about this workforce, a huge workforce in India, which is crying for labor reform, specifically this aspect of this migrant population not able to reach to their hometowns during COVID, database being not available. Then now there is a kind of a factorial where the lot of SMBs are clamoring that the workforce is not there. Uh, how do you see this whole thing from an India point of view evolving once this whole COVID settles down or maybe becomes part of our mainstream life in terms of some reforms, some changes coming in that particular segment of the population? And this is more towards about small and medium enterprises.
So I think the migrant labor crisis was a huge wake-up call. I think there was a lot of um, while everyone captured it, I think most governments and corporates realized the impact that it had, not just on MSMEs, but almost every single corporate in some way or the other. And there would be definite movement both by the government and the private sector to ensure that this migrant labor force continues. So there's a concept that we have within Quess, and most of my leadership keeps talking about. There are states that supply labor and there are states that consume the labor. That migratory behavior will continue to exist. But what will somewhere happen is the delocalize, the what you call the hyper localization of markets. So your Kirana store next door is now becoming digital. Your supply chains are getting integrated to be hyper local, and therefore there will be enough. The supplier states will also start demanding and generating a lot more demand now, and therefore the rush for talent at the migratory labor will still continue to exist because now people will want to find jobs near their hometown. But it's still not there yet. I think what will happen will be into three parts. There will be a part that the government will now start tracking and enabling. The second, there'll be a corporate workforce that will be enabling and skilling. And then there's this whole concept of how these migrant labor workforces would start getting back to normalcy and being part of the workforce again. And that will be driven purely by, how would you call, firms like us, staffing or employability generating firms, which will pull labor in because there's a need. We have to support a customer and they'll find ways. I had a very interesting discussion recently with a very large uh, homestay or a hostel company where they were talking to us saying that you want security guards to come to Bangalore. Most of them are not from Bangalore, they come from other cities. And
Right.
to ensure attrition comes down, I will build a hostel for you. So suddenly, what was a service to a company to provide a security guard now has also become an employee value proposition to the security guard himself to say, I will now give you accommodation as well and food as well. Well, I'll still maybe capture a part of it from your salary because anyway he would have paid someone, right? But at the end of the day, now you start seeing two sides of value propositioning happening, which will create that need for migrant labor to start going in the circle. So I think there will be that government angle, there will be the corporate angle. We're also seeing a lot of CSR initiatives in this angle to bring back the labor, to enable them, to ensure they get support, etc. So, but it was a wake-up call. I think people didn't realize the impact till they started seeing it.
Wake-up call it is, and we've hit time. But Vijay, let me tell you, thought-provoking, insightful, very riveting, and I think in the last 60 minutes or so, we could cover a melange and a range and topics which generally never gets discussed, but these are something what I call really awakening calls for each one of us, because there is a perceptible shift in the talent, in the landscape of how jobs are getting created. And for each one of us, it needs to be very imminent in our mindset that, look, we got to be conscious about the complexity. I like that term, in fact, and also being very conscious about that chaos, and this whole ambiguity will become the part of the life, and that will stay us awake. Besides Netflix, but more important, I think, great set of renditions what you provided. Really love the kind of, let's say, interaction, and also in terms of the whole length and the breadth of this vast topic. I'm glad we could cover a lot of that. But thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate, and this was very insightful. Thank you so much.
No, I think it has absolutely been my pleasure. I think the function of my answers has been your class act questions. So I think happy to share whatever I have seen and perceived and learned over the journey of my life at Quess. So allowing me to be part of this, and I just hope that I've added value to those people who have been patiently listening to me and all the gyan that I've given. So thanks again to everyone who's on the call.
Thank you so much, Vijay. Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.